So welcome to the Node.js Community Technical Steering Committee meeting for March 13th, 2019. We'll follow the agenda posted in the issue in the tracker. First of all, does anybody have any announcements that they would like to share?
I have. The call for proposal for NodeConf is open. So, if you want to apply and join, I'll put the link into the Google Docs.
Sounds good.
In the minutes.
Yep, just promote the panelists. Sorry, I'm just promoting a few people. Sounds good. Any other announcements? Okay, if not, let's move on to the agenda items. So the first one on the agenda is Node.js/Node nominating Jarish Punatil to the TSC. That's issue 26186. As Rich pointed out, we're at the point where we should basically, confirm the nomination. So what I'd suggest is if everybody could post their +1 or otherwise in the chat, we could confirm that we have the numbers. Okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 in the chat, as well as there were 3 comments in the issue itself. Now let me just make sure we don't have any double counting. I don't think so.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So I think from the counts in the chat, as well as the numbers in the issue itself, we're at 10, so that's more than half. And so welcome, Jarish. It's good to have you added to the TSC and look forward to your future contributions. So guess the next issue on the agenda is Distrust Semantic Roots 14.537. Nikita, did you want to lead the discussion on that one?
Yes, I will try to describe what's going on. So we're using NSS from Mozilla as the source for the certificates, as I understand. But the thing is that NSS alone does not entirely correspond to the Mozilla source of trust in what they use in Firefox. They have some overrides in Firefox code itself. For example, for Symantec root source, there was some backstory regarding those. The Symantec root source are still present in the list of root certificates that we use, but Mozilla out of the box, like in the default configuration, does not trust them in their browser. There is a whitelist of intermediate certificates that they do trust. I have left some links in the tissue closer to the bottom that points to the exact code that remove the distrust semantic source and leave some intermediate certificates as whitelisted. But basically, we have 3 options right now that Sam GitHub outlined, Sam Roberts. And either we use the NSS search list like we do now, but in that situation, we are trusting some root certificates that neither Google, as I understand now, nor Mozilla trust in their browsers. Or we remove semantic root source completely, but in that case, we will probably break something that works for browsers, I'm probably against that option, by the way. Or either way, implement some of the code like Mozilla does, but as I understand, we can just take the code from Mozilla browser because of the licensing differences. And is that correct? Okay, so in the third option, we will have to implement some of the logic in our code. And probably we don't have enough time for that until the release, I think, because that needs to be tested and so on. So my point of being in this app today was just to give a description so that everyone is at least hears of what is going on there. And also, like, about 9 people left a +1 on that distrust initially, and I think that some of those people are probably present here. So I want to know what everyone thinks about that issue. That's sorry. That's all from me for the initial description.
The concern that I left in there is that we don't know the scope of how many certificates were issued with the intermediaries that could be trusted. So Symantec has roots that signed intermediates that were then used to sign legitimate certificates. That's why Mozilla has taken the graduated route, because there's these intermediates which are theoretically trustable. But we don't know the scope of that. So maybe Mozilla does, but we've got less insight than them. So if we turn it off, how many people will squeal? We don't know.
One more thing to note. Basically, the intermediates that Mozilla trusts are Apple, Google, and DigiSearch. There are just three companies, I think. So that's the total list of the intermediates. And there is some number of different certificates. Yes.
So you're saying there's only 3 that you think are in the whitelist?
There are 3 companies that are in the whitelist, and those give about 10 or 15 certificates.
And so what I didn't catch from your description is, are you suggesting we try and do something for 12.x, or do you think or did you say it was late? I wasn't quite sure.
At this point, I don't have some strict opinion on this, so I'm not sure.
Here's my proposal. We want to do something about this, but it turns out to be a lot more complicated than just pulling root certs out. So if we leave it as is for now, but work towards a solution where we either follow Mozilla with their embedded logic on if Symantec root, but this intermediary then trust, otherwise don't trust. We could implement that, just not right now. Or perhaps Mozilla moves to removing them completely, and then we just follow that. We have given ourselves permission to bump minor on security majors. So we could still do that in Node 12 during its lifetime. And I don't think that would be unreasonable if we had a clear path, as long as we had some sort of opt-out mechanism. Because I think we can justify it, and I think it's strong enough feeling as demonstrated with the +1 so far in doing this. So for now, I would say, unless somebody's got a lot of time on their hands, we're not doing anything about it for 12.0.0.
Is everyone fine with introducing something like this in a minor release? Like, are there any strict objections against that?
I guess I'd be okay until it goes into LTS, at which point maybe we'd want to think about it a bit more.
We could flag this in the release notes too, that this might happen. Not that anyone, well, I guess some people do read it.
So basically, you are proposing to remove this from the 12.0 milestone and instead flag that in the release notes that we can install those updates in a manual release that distress some of the certs until the LTS happens.
Yeah, that's my proposal. Except that I wonder if if anyone's actually, you know, A, got the understanding to do this work, and B, the time to implement it. And is it realistic even saying that we might do this, because is there any chance that any of us are going to have time to do it?
I wonder about the licensing question around the Mozilla source code. Like, I think we can't just take the code from Mozilla. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, ours would have to be a bit different because theirs is built on top of their entire library system, but the logic could be the same, and I think we can just copy that and probably just reference it. We've done that with other things before.
Oh, so if you can base all that code, I think that it isn't going to be very harsh, but I could try to take a look at that later, but probably not for 12.0. I think that your proposal sounds good, by the way. Like, if everyone is like, if there are no major concerns about updating the root source in a minor release, then that sounds good to me.
Okay, so maybe it's worth getting that proposal into the issue, and just if anybody objects or whatever, we can deal with it there. Otherwise, it doesn't sound like anybody's speaking out at this point anyway.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so the next issue on the agenda then is the tracking issue on board meetings. Myles, do you have an update on that front?
Yeah, so we had the inaugural OpenJS board meeting this week. This was on Monday afternoon as part of the Node part of the Open Source Leadership Summit. As of this moment now, all of the legal stuff that's required for the merge to move forward has been done. We've officially launched as the OpenJS Foundation. The board has identified a handful of things that are part of the next steps, and there will be some communication coming out making that more explicit. The kind of biggest thing that needs to happen now moving forward is the creation and structuring of the CPC. We will continue to be having the Bootstrap meetings. For now, the Bootstrap repo is still in the Node.js org, but will likely move to an OpenJS org at the time at which we settle on a specific name for it. My assumption is that a lot of the workflow and these kinds of edge cases will be figured out in the next meeting, which is next Monday. So, anyone who kind of cares and wants to get involved, next Monday is a good meeting to try to get to. Are there any questions that anyone has right now? Anything that hasn't been entirely clear in the process? Okay, very cool.
Just that I have opened an issue, which is later on the agenda, just to go through a few of the concrete things we need to start thinking about.
Okay, very cool.
So we can look at those as well.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, from the actual day-to-day side, and Michael's issue will get into that, like, the biggest thing that's left for us to do is to revisit our charter. Although likely what that will make the most sense is, you know, the new foundation has a series of like levels that projects can come in at. And the impact stage is, you know, for those kind of top projects that have representation at the Cross Project Council. And we will be one of those impact projects from the JSF side. The projects that raised their hand were jQuery, Appium, and Webpack. And there's one more, the name is escaping me, it's documented somewhere.
Dojo?
Yes, Dojo. And so, you know, kind of part of spinning up the CPC will be adjusting our charter appropriately, but there isn't, you know, a massive rush to get all this stuff done immediately. It will all kind of happen, you know, naturally as part of spinning up this new governance group, which for those of you who have not been following, anyone will be able to participate in, whether or not they are like elected members of that team. Our travel budget is unaffected by this. So, you know, our travel budget will remain what it has been. What may end up changing is the way in which the budget gets allocated and dispersed. And we're looking into specific tools that would actually make this a lot easier to manage and clearer for us as a project to kind of do these things. I think overall, the effect to us as a technical steering committee will be that like a couple things that we're currently chartered for that are much more around like meta governance of the foundation will not really be necessary anymore and will be pushed up to the CPC, allowing us to be much more focused on the technical governance of the Node project. But we have set up things in place, including what the CPC meetings and town halls that we have planned, as well as like invited, we're planning to invite projects periodically to present to the board. The intention from the board as a whole is that there should be just as much access as there has been in the past for our project. And if anything, it will hopefully become easier for us to request things, to do things, and to collaborate, because there will be clearer channels and process in place for us to get those things done. So the hope would be, you know, that introducing this little bit of extra process will actually create far less process. So for example, this is actually one of the biggest ones for us, would be like our charter and any of the changes that we need to make. Those first batch of changes, which may be more substantial, will have to go to the board. But in general, in the charter of the CPC, smaller charter changes don't actually require board approval anymore. So that would allow for us, in the case where there's like small grammatical errors or small updates that we'd want to do to the charter, you know, we're no longer waiting on the board to make those changes. Another big change into the bylaws themselves was the ability for our board to now do electronic vote. That's something that we've gotten from the JSF that we inherited. So there's things that required meetings before that now will actually be able to be done out of band. And the board is fairly active right now. So, you know, the hope to me would be in general that our day-to-day should not really change at all. And we should see less friction in doing some of the things that we were doing before, and the ability to not focus on some of the things that were our responsibilities in the past. I think that's all I got for right now.
Okay, so yeah, we can talk about some of the specifics in the later issue, but let's move on to the strategic initiative review. The first one I was hoping, Myles, you could fill us in on. I think that it sounded like the modules working group had come to some consensus and next directions. Yeah,
so where we are right now, and I'm doing the last little bit of kind of documentation and engineering work right now, but we have a proposal for a replacement for the upstream modules implementation that we have right now. You should expect that pull request either a little bit later today or tomorrow. Hoping to have, like, our intention is that this implementation will hopefully be able to land in Node.js 12 and potentially even be backported to 10. But it's something that, you know, we've done a lot of work to get this pull request in early enough that there's time for upstream review before the cutoff date. There is no Semver major changes in here. I mean, we could argue about semver minor or not. It is definitely semver major to the ES module implementation, but there is nothing, as far as I know, changes that we're making outside of the ES module implementation itself. The biggest and most substantial change compared to the current implementation is the introduction of a new type field inside of the package JSON. Inside of the package JSON, you can include type and give module as a value to that type. CommonJS is also a valid type, but it is the default type in our current implementation. If you give the module mode to type as the flag, then .js files are able to be imported as ESM. There's also the inclusion of a new .cjs extension specifically for the module mode so that you can continue to import CommonJS files, and we're able to do it without lots of deep statting. Another one of the big substantial changes is file extension and directory resolution. So in the current implementation, we're matching more kind of the behavior of import maps, which is a W3C proposal within the WICG group right now. It is something that there's already polyfills in the browser for, and it's on track to be implemented in the browser to allow for bare imports. The big kind of difference between our CommonJS resolution algorithm and what is supported from a feature set within import maps is mostly around the ability to import directories that have an index.js file, as well as the ability for us to kind of arbitrarily drop the file extensions. The majority of the group is interested in this kind of being the default behavior for ESM implementation, more specifically that file extensions themselves are mandatory to include unless the file you're importing does not have a file extension. But we do have a flag to allow you to have kind of the current Node file extension resolution algorithm that's able to be opted into with a flag. Our hope is to kind of get this implementation out, get it into the hands of developers, see what the ecosystem pulse is around it, and either, you know, remove that flag and bring back the current behavior if there's a lot of pushback, potentially remove that implementation if people really like the new implementation. But the hope was to create kind of, you know, defaults that are aligning closer towards a consistent behavior between multiple runtimes, but for right now to still, you know, make it easy for people to opt into an experience that may be closer to what their expectations are. Are there any questions or concerns about this right now?
So that basically everything you mentioned though is just against the base, like the implementation, the experimental implementation that was there before, right?
Yeah, it does not touch the CommonJS loader at all. It doesn't affect any of the behavior outside of the experimental modules implementation.
Okay.
One other one that's in there that I think is kind of fun is we landed today an experimental JSON support. There's work being done at the What Working Group to standardize importing JSON modules. And we will actually have, as far as I know, the first shipped implementation of what is attempting to be spec'd out there. So there will also be an experimental JSON modules flag that you can add that will allow you to import JSON modules following the expected behavior of JSON modules in the browser. So that's another one that comes in there as well. All of this is documented. The pull request will come. It's not huge, but it's not nothing. I am hoping that we do not have a ton of pushback from core on how we've tried to do things. But I would very much appreciate if, you know, people from the TSC have any concerns with any of the things that I've brought up, or if, you know, you see issues with our implementation, you know, that you engage with me early so that we can try to rectify those concerns. It's really important to me that we get this in for Node 12. The intent from the whole group is that we hope that we want to unflag this by LTS. So it's very important that we get that baseline in with 12 and get this in front of people and get people working with it, so we can try to get this stabilized in the next couple months.
Okay, and the documentation, is there an existing link you can point us to, or is it going to be that PR that you're talking about?
Yeah, when I open the PR, all the changes to the docs are will be in there. There's also separately from that a blog post that's being drafted by the group right now that is going to be like a chunk of copy that can also be reviewed if you want something that's a little bit more like prose and less doc. So I'll include a reference to that PR. We don't yet have consensus on all the nitpicks around the language and the prose, but I'll include references to all the places. I'm also happy. There's a lot of this has been consensus building for over a year. And so there's a lot of different decisions that we've worked on, and it's been a lot of work to get there. So, if anyone is, not loving the direction that it had gone, similarly, please reach out to me. I will take the time to kind of walk you through how we came to that decision. A lot of these things end up being very interconnected. So it's been hard for us to reach it. And even where it is right now, some of the things that are in there are still somewhat controversial or still subject to change quite a bit before we stabilize. But it's really hard because of how interconnected all of these things are, that you move kind of like one little piece and it involves, reimagining a whole bunch. So I don't want to say that the implementation is fragile, because I don't think that that's a fair description. But I do think that changing any one little bit of the current implementation does have a huge butterfly effect into the rest of it. So, if you do have concerns, please grab me so I can walk you through how we reached the consensus that we're at right now.
Okay, any questions before we move on? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, just
okay.
Accidentally unmuted, sorry.
Okay, no problem. On the NAP front, I don't think I have anything to report this week. Gabriel, do you have anything?
Yeah, so the TSFN, and with that an API version 4 backport PR has landed in version 10, thanks to Beth. So now only 8 is still to go.
Okay. N.X, only 8 left. Okay, OpenSSL evolution. I know there's a little bit of discussion on that in the issue itself, or the PR to document that. Rod, do you have anything you want to add, or?
No, I mean, it's worth updating that 1.1.1 is on track to be backported to the next Node 10 release, I think, which is an important step. And TLS 1.3 is on track to be merged into master very shortly with I believe there's a backport pull request to 11 because there's some differences that require an explicit backport. But there's also discussion about how to get that into Node 10 as well. So that's on track. Sam's doing excellent work there.
Yeah, that's the PR that Sam has against 10 for 1.1.1.
Yeah. Okay,
great. Yeah, we have a release working group meeting tomorrow, where we're just going to be reviewing what the plans are for the next series of LTS releases. I believe from what he said in that issue, it looks like there's no risk of ABI breakage, so I see that going through without a problem.
Yep.
Sounds good.
So TLS 1.3, I think Sam's work suggests that can go into Node 10, but requires a runtime flag to change the default max from 1.2 to 1.3 if you want to opt in. So that's how to get backward compatible.
Right. So it'd be different than the other releases in that you'd have to ask for it to be turned on.
Yeah.
It would require a flag to enable. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? On the workers front, Anna, anything to report on that front?
Hi, yeah, it's been a while since I've been here. Yeah, we're ironing out a couple of the last Kingston workers. I'm personally still on the track that I want them to come out of experimental state in Node 12. I don't know if that's realistic, but it's a goal. We've had some PRs in the recent past that were about aligning the message channel, message port API that we have implemented more with the web equivalent. And yeah, there are a couple PRs open, but nothing too huge, I would say.
Okay, anything in particular blocking the goal to get it into 12, or just things that need, a bunch of work that still has to happen?
I wouldn't say so, no. I mean, so we have this issue where we are talking about what we need for workers to come out of 12.
Right.
To come out of experimental state, sorry.
Right.
I don't know if we're gonna hit every check mark in there. But I mean, I would personally feel comfortable with moving forward with that.
Okay, so maybe for the rest of the TSC members, it would be good if people had time to take a look and just comment on the list and see how close they think it is.
Yeah. I mean, for example, we have this item of reports of worker threads deployed in production. And I mean, I have had people come to me telling me about that, but it's nothing public. Or we have this action item of framework adaption. I'm not exactly sure what we're expecting there. I mean, there are a few NPM modules for worker threads out there. Yeah.
Right. So, for example, the reports of production use, is there any way you can get those captured, or ask people to, put it somewhere you can point to, or?
I have tried that in the past, but it might make more sense to reach out again now that we have removed the flag for experimental status for a while.
Yeah. Just thinking, if you've got people who that is the case, we can just get them to help us write it down. That would remove having to think about it.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on to the next section? Okay, I'm just going down the list. I think governance, I think we've covered enough. Jeremiah, anything on new stream modules, new stream APIs?
No progress since the last time, which is basically kind of stalled on the JS end, and I'm trying to make time to look at how this would look like if we applied sort of a pull stream API to libv, which is what I'm going to be taking a look at next.
Okay. Okay. Do we have Michael Zasso? I don't think so. On V8 currency, I think 7.3 was green at least. Maybe not. Let's see, async hooks, Ali.
Yeah, so there was a diagnostic summit at the Google Munich office last week, and there was a lot of discussion around async hooks. There is, in fact, quite a bit to cover in this short summary. So what I would do is point people to there's a PR for a new async storage API, and there's a document that talks about some performance changes that we're going to make, including sort of removing the need for most users to use the destroy hook. But if this is interesting to you, please go take a look at the summary and the videos and the minutes for the diagnostic summit, and you can find them in the Node.js diagnostic working group repo.
Right. Is there any chance you could grab those two links, the PR for the async storage and that doc, and add them into the minutes here?
I will do that.
Okay, because that might just give people a shortcut, one less thing to think about to actually do it. Anything else you want to add on that front?
That's basically it.
Okay. The next one is open web standards. Myles, anything to say on that? Because I don't think we have Joey today.
Not a ton to say right now. There was a new key value store built in for the web platform that got kind of presented this week that included using a namespace. That namespace was using std : as the way of clarifying that namespace. I brought this up in our tracking issue for adding namespaces to Node. I know there's still a number of altering opinions about how we should go about it. But just kind of put that on people's radars. This is one proposal. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily the way things are going to go forward, but it looks like Chrome is getting ready to do an origin trial of it. So it's, I think, some good usage in the ecosystem to use as an example for that pattern.
Okay. And then the last one, we don't have Sakri Priyan today, so we'll skip that one as well. Okay, so that's our review of strategic initiatives. Good, sounds like we're making progress on lots of fronts, so that's great to see. The next thing on the list is the checklist to address the changes to the move to the OpenJS Foundation. So that's issue in the admin repo 311. And as Myles said, we don't need to necessarily rush to get everything done, but I thought it would be good to just get people thinking about that. And maybe we can just walk through the list and discuss any that people think are particularly important. The first one is talking about how we will elect representatives to CPC. The governance that was written as part of the bootstrap is that there's 2 for the project. So I think we need to agree with the community committee on how those are allocated. I guess, the most obvious proposal would be that, like we have 1 board representative from each of the groups, we would have 1 CPC representative. But this is the time to sort of think about that and decide what we think makes the most sense for the project. Any strong thoughts or things that people want to talk about on that for that one to start out with?
I would start before trying to figure out some big process, given that this is an exceptional situation anyway. I would try to see who would like to run. Overall.
So we could open an issue in the admin repo just asking from across the project, like
from both the TSC and ComCom.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was suggesting. Why in the admin repo, so we could do that. If
yeah.
Do you want to open that issue, or do you want me to open the issue?
If you can, that would be better. Probably, I'm super tied up on too many things. So.
Sure. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments on that front?
Yeah, I think one good thing to keep in mind as we're going through and we're thinking about the CPC representation, and it probably makes sense for us to maybe, as a group, hold a meeting with both committees and review the CPC charter and get an understanding of how engagement will work. Because at the very least, it's a very, very different committee than we've traditionally done, at least with the TSC, in the sense that there are elected members who are the voting members, but there's also self-selected members, which are the regular members, and observers, which is anyone from the whole group, and they all can participate in the meetings. So for us, at least the way I think about it, us electing someone to be that voting member, well, on one hand is, a vote of confidence that that person is going to do a good job. It's, in my opinion, much more around who actually has the bandwidth and time to committing to doing that job than being the sole representative of our organization, because every single person in this meeting, every single person in the project is encouraged to come and participate. So I do think that the stakes when we're thinking about those roles are a little bit different. And we may want to, just think about how we assign those roles. It may make a lot more sense to be based on who has the most bandwidth as opposed to, a representative from each group. Although I do think it will be very valuable for us to have a commitment from both of our committees to be actively engaged in the CPC. To be honest, like having an active and functional CPC is going to be the central point of like how this new foundation is going to be successful. And I think one of the things that's really cool here as well for us to explore, and it's a little tangential, but it's also like we're going to have a lot of opportunities to reevaluate some of the things that we've thought of as being default node initiatives to see if whether or not they make more sense as a foundation initiative or whether we want to have both. The security working group, I think, is a good example of this, or some of the things that we've done in the past around mentorship. It's an interesting opportunity for us to just kind of like evaluate that stuff and see how much we want to be doing in our project or how much we want to be doing as kind of a larger scaled effort across the whole foundation.
Okay. I think I'll just mention a few of the others. Again, we don't have to get into the details of all of them. Just want to get people thinking. Agree on a timeline for electing the CP representatives, obviously tied to figuring out how we're going to do it. As the governance is currently written, the Node.js project also continues to have one board representative, at least for the first year. It was written as it would be somebody selected from the TSC or the community committee as voted on by the members of the Node.js organization. So I think, you know, we as a group along with the ComCom just need to say, yeah, okay, that's, you know, hopefully we would have heard if that doesn't make sense, but yeah, we think that makes sense, and how do we put that into practice? And then there's sort of the more tactical things of, you know, updating the charter and governance. I think those will mostly be around the board representation. I'm trying to think, Myles, are there any things other than that that really come to mind in terms, I guess that and a few changes possibly to the moderation policy just in respect to escalation. But other than that, I can't think of too many things off the top of my head that should change.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not thinking that there's going to be a ton that will change. And I think like a lot more of it is going to start becoming apparent as like the CPC itself starts ramping up and as like projects start comparing. Like, so, you know, like I won't get into all of it right now, but it's like we use a DCO right now. The foundation may have a CLA. Do we want to accept that CLA as well? So like I think that like there will be different edge cases that come up, but my opinion is that most of them will come up fairly naturally. And, you know, I think a lot of the meta process in the foundation is going to be informed by our work. So I don't think that there's going to be, you know, a ton of changes that are necessary from our side.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking more of the initial changes too, right? It's kind of like, okay, we might want to get some stuff updated sooner than later, but probably not a huge amount of stuff. The other things on the list are, you know, update to the code of conduct references, because and that again maybe take some time, but the governance for the foundation says that we'll share one, which is very close to what we already have anyway. The escalation policy, escalation I mentioned, the travel fund administration, just figuring out what that is. You know, it sounds like Myles, it's already been thought a bit about, and for this year at least, there's no changes, right? So.
The only thing that may end up changing this year would be potentially a slight change to process, but not the actual fund itself or its availability to our members.
Right. Okay, and the individual membership program, you know, as part of the process, the consensus seemed to be that belonged under the foundation as opposed to Node specifically. So that, you know, doing that transition, although again, I think that's something more probably the ComCom versus the TSCs was more active on that front. And that's really the current list. So if there's any other things that people can think of, we should add them to the list. And if you have any strong thoughts on any of those things, please add them to the issue. Or of course, as Myles said, you know, come to the Bootstrap meeting where you can talk directly. And I think that's probably good, because we do want to spend some time with the update from Rod as well, which is the next issue, the next thing on the agenda. Let me see if I can just get back to the agenda here. I've somehow lost myself there. Right, which is the platform and compiler proposal for 12.x. So Rod, you want to give us an update on that?
And Michael, would you be able to share that spreadsheet or screen share?
Yes, I will, if I can find the link. Just give me a sec.
Anyway, so that we had a good discussion yesterday, you know, the usual panic as we get close to a Zenver major, particularly LTS, that we're locking ourselves into 3+ years of supporting a particular platform. So we went through and decided to come up with some proposals for minimums. And so the constraints that we are juggling here are, you know, primarily there's build working group resources. That's mainly people resources. So time to maintain this. Can we stretch ourselves? And we've been increasingly trying to tighten our scope a bit more so that we can manage our people resources better, which are very limited right now. There's wanting to support, you know, as many users as possible, but acknowledging that many of the platforms that we are currently supporting will be EOL in the LTS, the Node 12 LTS timeframe. So things like Debian 8 go EOL soon. That's early next year, and Ubuntu 16.04 goes EOL, or 14.04 goes EOL very soon. So, and then there's also compilers that we have to juggle as well. We get pressure, particularly from V8, minimum compiler versions. So the two things we're looking at are what's the minimum on each of these operating systems and architectures that we support for Node 12, and then what are those combinations plus compiler that we use to build binaries for releases. And we have these designations as well: Tier 1, Tier 2, and experimental. Tier 1 are the main ones we care about, like Linux 64, Mac OS, and Windows are Tier 1. And then everything else is Tier 2. That's our care factor. If things are severely broken, then we'll obviously fix them in Tier 1 and Tier 2. But if they're, we'll go chasing our tails down deep rabbit holes for the Tier 1 ones. Experimental means we don't test commits. Mostly we don't test commits, and we don't produce binaries. We certainly don't produce binaries for anything that we don't test commits on. Now, so the EOL upstream. So the ones we've outlined, we have. There's actually a site I found yesterday called linuxlifecycle.com that actually has everything nice in a nice page, and you can see that Enterprise Linux 6, which is CentOS and RHEL, hits EOL in November 2020, so next year, and Ubuntu 14.04 is EOL next month, and 16.04 is EOL in 2021. Debian 8 is EOL next year, April 2020. So it's very close to CentOS and RHEL 6. So they're the ones we care about mainly. So that puts us for Node 12. We're suggesting that we lift the minimum up to Enterprise Linux 7, which is RHEL 7 and CentOS 7, and Debian 9. Debian stretch, and they're our sort of the fundamentals. There's Ubuntu is a little bit different, but I think we're saying in there 16.04 is that we'll stick with 16.04 as our minimum. So for where we can, we're still going to build on CentOS, and we'll lift that up to CentOS 7, because the nice thing about CentOS is we get compilers GCC compilers that they jigger to be libc compatible with that CentOS version, which we don't get anywhere else. So we can use GCC 6 on CentOS 7, which gives us compatibility quite a way back with like Ubuntu 16.04. And I think actually even Ubuntu 14.04, you would still get binary compatibility with 14.04 if we did it this way.
Correct.
And so we can do that on x64 and on ARM64. We need to test moving up to Debian 9 with GCC 6 on ARM v7, which we think we have the tools to do, but we haven't done that yet. I'll skip over a few. We are currently not suggesting changes to macOS because we're not. We have a range of options, but we need feedback on that because we don't feel like we have the expertise. So we were going to suggest that maybe Ali and others on the V8 team, Ben Nordhaus, others that have historical expertise on macOS versions, and also with macOS you've got to choose not only the version you compile on and the Xcode version, but also the which version of macOS you are being compatible with. And we've still got that as, I think we're compiling on 10.11 now, but we're supporting all the way back to 10.7. And we think maybe it's time to lift that because we have run into problems with headers because Mac doesn't do the greatest job with backporting header changes. So maybe it's time to lift both of those numbers, but we need feedback on that. Windows, we are waiting for feedback from, we're talking to Joao at Janae Systems, who Microsoft contracts some of this support, and we rely on him a lot for that. Raphael has had some suggestions about moving more aggressively to the future with Microsoft, with Windows stuff. So that's an ongoing email discussion we're having, and we'll come up with some proposals for that soon, hopefully. SmartOS, I don't think Colin's on this call, is he?
I don't think so.
We're proposing to lift to SmartOS 18 just because it's the latest, and we've sort of just bumped it in the past few LTSs. So that would be good. But we'll get feedback from Colin/Joyant on that. And FreeBSD, we're talking about dropping that back to experimental. I think it was tier 2, but we just don't have a champion for FreeBSD anymore. So we're not doing releases for them, but it is in our test infrastructure. We're talking about removing that for Node 12. And by the way, this is only for Node 12 plus. We're not talking about changing our test setup for Node 11 minus. That would stay as it is. We're just talking about changing into the future. One of the big changes in here that we sort of landed on as a rough proposal was to drop ARM v6 into experimental. Now, we got a lot of feedback from the ARM v6 community. There are legitimate use cases, and lots of people are relying on, particularly for Raspberry Pi Zero, which is a fairly new platform that lots of people are building stuff on top of. So a compromise that we're discussing is potentially spinning up a new project called something like Unofficial Builds. And it would be independent in a similar way that the Docker Node project is independent. There's very little overlap between Docker Node and Build or even the TSC. They sort of have their own little world. So spinning up a project that cares for these experimental or not even considered build types, and ARM v6 would be one of them. Linux x86 could be another one because there's been a lot of call for x86 binaries since we dropped them in Node 10, I think it was, or maybe it was 8. So we could actually spin that up in this project. And all the ARM v6 community cares about is binaries. So we could solve our problems with tests taking forever on Raspberry Pi 1s by dropping official support but still producing binaries in an unofficial capacity, such that it's at arm's length and they don't hold up releases. We don't have to be held deeply accountable when things break, that the communities around these platforms take some responsibility for making things work and making sure the binaries come out. So that's a proposal. I'll put up, there's some details in the build repo and some of the issues, but I'll put up a more clear proposal about what that might look like. And then, yeah, the rest of this will go as a pull request to building.md. So that's just a heads up. Are there any questions or comments or concerns about that prior to it coming in? This will be a PR, by the way, for discussion. This is Build's recommendation. The TSC will need to sign off on this. Stunned silence. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Since we're like 2 minutes over, I would say that at this point, let's move on to just see if there's any questions on the YouTube channel. I don't see any yet. So if you are listening and have a question, I see a hi, but maybe 1 more minute to ask a question. Otherwise, we're going to end for today. Okay, no, I still don't see anything, so I'm going to stop the stream.